The day I discovered my parents had drained my emergency fund for their luxury vacation to Cabo was the same day I realized I'd been funding my own invisibility for years. My name is Riley Thompson, and what started as a missing bank deposit turned into the most expensive lesson my family ever taught me about respect. But here's the twist they never saw coming. While they were sipping margaritas on the beach with my money, I was using their vacation fund to hire the lawyer who would make them pay every penny back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. If this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain was coming down in sheets across Portland that Tuesday morning, the kind of November downpour that makes the whole city look like it's drowning in gray watercolor. I stood at the window of my Pearl District apartment, watching the streetlights reflect off the wet pavement below, completely unaware that my life was about to split into two distinct chapters. Before I knew, and after I found out, my phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, interrupting the steady rhythm of rain against glass. The caller ID showed First National Bank of Oregon, which seemed odd since I'd just deposited my paycheck the day before. I picked up, expecting some routine verification call or maybe a promotion for a new credit card I didn't need. "Miss Thompson, this is Janet from First National. I'm calling regarding your savings account ending in. We show an unusual withdrawal pattern and wanted to verify these transactions with you." Her voice carried that careful politeness bank employees use when they're about to deliver news you won't like. My stomach did a small flip. "What kind of unusual pattern?" I asked, moving away from the window and settling onto the edge of my couch. The leather was cold against my legs, and I pulled my oversized sweater tighter around myself. "Well, we show 3 large withdrawals over the past week, totaling $12,800. The account balance is now at $437. Janet paused, letting the numbers sink in. "Did you authorize these transactions?" The words hit me like ice water. $12,800. Gone. That wasn't just money sitting in an account somewhere. That was 3 years of careful saving. Skipped dinners out, secondhand furniture, and walking to work instead of taking rideshare. That was my emergency fund, the financial cushion I'd built one $20 bill at a time since graduating college. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, like I was suddenly 12 years old again and asking my parents to explain why I couldn't have the same brand name shoes as my brother Ethan. $12,800. Withdrawn in 3 separate transactions. The first was on Thursday for $4,000, then Friday for $5,000, and yesterday for $3,800. All were processed through online banking using your login credentials. I stood up abruptly, pacing toward the kitchen. I didn't make any withdrawal. I don't even know how to transfer that much money online. There's supposed to be daily limits. "Yes, normally there are." Janet agreed, and I could hear her typing in the background. "But it looks like someone called last Tuesday to increase your daily transfer limit temporarily. The request came from a number we have on file as your emergency contact." My blood turned cold. Emergency contact. That would be my parents' landline, the number I'd given the bank years ago when I first opened the account. Back when I still believed family meant safe. Back when I thought David and Catherine Thompson were people I could trust with my financial information in case something happened to me. "Can you tell me exactly what time those calls were made?" I asked, grabbing a pen and a notepad from the kitchen drawer. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced myself to write down every detail Janet provided. The calls had been made at 10:47 a.m. on Tuesday, which was strange because that was during my work hours at Nexus Creative. I would have been in the middle of our weekly team meeting, not calling my bank to move money around. After I hung up with Janet, I sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to the rain and the distant hum of traffic on the freeway. The notebook lay open in front of me with the transaction details written in my increasingly shaky handwriting. 4,000, 5,000, 3,800. Numbers that represented months of eating ramen instead of takeout, of shopping at thrift stores instead of the mall, of saying no to weekend trips with friends because I was being responsible. I called the bank back and requested a complete transaction history for the past month. While I waited for them to email it to me, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think of any legitimate reason my parents would need to access my account. Medical emergency? No. They both had excellent insurance through Dad's real estate business. Car trouble? Dad had just posted photos on Facebook of his new BMW. Maybe they'd planned to pay me back before I noticed. The email arrived 20 minutes later. I opened the PDF with hands that had progressed from shaking to trembling. There it was, laid out in stark black and white, 3 withdrawals, each one timed perfectly for when I'd be at work and unable to check my phone. But what made my stomach drop wasn't just the missing money. It was the pattern of smaller withdrawals I'd somehow missed over the past 6 months. $50 here, $120 there, always amounts small enough to escape my notice during casual balance checks. They'd been skimming from my account for months. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my online banking, something I admittedly didn't do often enough. The full picture painted itself across my screen in a series of divots that made me physically nauseous. My parents hadn't just taken the $12,800 from last week. They'd been systematically draining my savings account for half a year, taking small amounts that I'd attributed to my own forgetfulness or miscalculations. The total came to over $18,000. $18,000 that I'd saved through 3 years of living like a college student despite having a decent job. $18,000 that was supposed to be my safety net, my down payment on a house someday, my insurance against job loss or medical bills or any of the 1,000 things that could go wrong in a person's life. I closed the laptop and put my head in my hands. The rain outside had intensified, and I could hear it hammering against the windows like it was trying to get inside. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too much like a place where someone could sit and realize their own family had been stealing from them for months, without a second thought. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. "Riley, honey, how are you?" Catherine's voice was bright and cheerful with that particular tone she used when she wanted something or when she was about to ask me to do her a favor. "I was just thinking about you this morning." "Were you thinking about me while you were withdrawing money from my savings account?" The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and direct in a way that wasn't typical for me. Usually I was the peacekeeper in family conversations, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. There was a pause, a long, telling pause that lasted just a beat too long to be anything other than guilt. "Oh, sweetie, I can explain that," she said finally, and her voice had shifted to that practiced maternal tone she used when she was about to justify something I wouldn't like. "We had a little cash flow issue with the business, and we knew you wouldn't mind helping out family. We were going to pay you back before you even noticed." $18,000, Mom. You've taken $18,000 from my account over the past 6 months. I was standing now, pacing between my kitchen and living room like a caged animal. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice $18,000? Now, Riley, don't be dramatic. It's not $18,000. Her voice carried that slight edge of irritation that always appeared when someone questioned her version of events. "And we're family. Family helps each other out during difficult times." "Then why didn't you ask me?" The question hung in the air between us, and I already knew the answer. They didn't ask because they knew I would have said no. They didn't ask because asking would have required acknowledging that it was my money, my choice, my right to refuse. "We didn't want to worry you with business problems," she said smoothly. "Your father and I thought it would be better to handle it quietly and pay you back without causing you stress." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Without causing me stress. I just spent 20 minutes on the phone with my bank thinking someone had hacked my account. I thought I was the victim of identity theft." "Well, now you know it's just family," Catherine said, as if that made everything better. "We'll get the money back to you as soon as this vacation is over." We needed to pay for the trip, and the business account was temporarily tied up in some investments your father made. Vacation. The word hit me like a physical blow. "You used my emergency fund to pay for a vacation." "It's not just a vacation, Riley. It's a business trip. Your father is meeting with some potential clients down in Cabo, and I'm networking with other real estate professionals. It's an investment in our future." I sat down hard on my couch, staring at the rain-streaked window. "So you stole my money to fund a business trip that you're calling a vacation." "Don't use that word." Her voice turned sharp. "We didn't steal anything. We borrowed money from family, which is completely normal and appropriate. I'm sure if you called your brother Ethan, he'd tell you you're overreacting." Of course she'd bring up Ethan, golden child Ethan, who'd gotten a full ride to college, a job at Dad's real estate firm straight out of graduation, and a down payment for his house as a wedding gift. Ethan, who'd never had to save for months to afford a vacation, or eat generic cereal to stretch his grocery budget. "Have you borrowed money from Ethan's accounts too?" I asked. Another pause, shorter this time, but still noticeable. Ethan's financial situation is different. He has responsibilities now, with the house and Emma and the baby on the way. And I don't have responsibilities, I don't have bills and rent and a life that requires money. My voice was getting louder, and I could hear myself starting to sound like the dramatic daughter Catherine always accused me of being whenever I stood up for myself. "Of course you do, sweetie. But you're single and you don't have the same obligation. You can afford to help out family right now. When you're married with children, we'll understand if you can't contribute as much." There it was, the fundamental difference in how my parents viewed my life versus Ethan's. His money was sacred because he had a wife and a baby coming. My money was available for family use, because I was single and therefore my financial security mattered less. I was 26 years old with a career and an apartment, and dreams of buying a house someday, but in their eyes, I was still just the unmarried daughter whose savings account was apparently part of the family emergency fund. "I need that money back," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "All of it. Within the week." "Oh honey, that's not realistic. We just got here yesterday and we've already paid for the resort and the activities. We can't just cancel everything and come home. How about we set up a payment plan when we get back? Maybe $500 a month until it's paid off." $500 a month. At that rate, it would take 3 years to pay back the money they'd taken without permission. 3 years of monthly reminders that my own parents had stolen from me and then acted like I was being unreasonable for wanting it back promptly. "No payment plan," I said. "I want it back in full, and I want it back now." "Riley, you're being unreasonable. We're your parents. We raised you and supported you through college. The least you can do is help us out when we need it." "You didn't support me through college," I corrected her. "I worked 3 jobs and took out student loans that I'm still paying off. You and Dad paid for Ethan's education, but I funded my own." "That's because Ethan showed initiative and got better grades," Catherine replied without missing a beat. "If you had applied yourself more in high school, you could have gotten scholarships like your brother." I closed my eyes and leaned back against the couch cushions. This was how it always went with my parents. Somehow, every conversation about their behavior turned into a critique of my choices, my work ethic, my life. I wasn't grateful enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't family-oriented enough. I was the daughter who asked too many questions and expected too much consideration. "I'm hanging up now," I said quietly. "I expect all $18,000 back in my account by Friday, or I'm going to the police." "The police?" Catherine's voice rose an octave. "You'd call the police on your own parents over money. What kind of daughter threatens her family with legal action? The kind whose family steals from her and then acts like she should be grateful for it." I ended the call and set my phone face down on the coffee table. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from anger, pure and simple. Anger at my parents for taking my money without asking. Anger at myself for not checking my account more carefully. Anger at the way Catherine had dismissed my concerns like I was a child throwing a tantrum over candy money. The apartment felt suffocating suddenly, filled with the weight of this new reality I was trying to process. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, needing air and movement and space to think. Portland in November wasn't exactly ideal for therapeutic walks, but I needed to be somewhere other than the place where I'd just learned my own family had been robbing me blind. I walked through the Pearl District without any particular destination in mind, letting the rain soak through my jacket and clear my head. The streets were busy with the usual Tuesday lunch crowd, people hurrying between meetings and ducking into cafes to escape the weather. Everyone looked purposeful and focused, like they had important places to be and problems that made sense. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment I hoped it might be my mother calling to apologize and promise to return the money immediately. Instead, it was a photo from my father's phone, him and Catherine sitting at a beachside restaurant, drinks in hand, sunset painting the sky behind them, orange and pink. The caption read, "Greetings from paradise. Weather is perfect and the food is amazing. Miss you kid." I stared at the photo for a long time, standing there in the rain while people walked around me like I was a streetlight or a parking meter. My parents were lounging at what looked like an expensive resort, drinking cocktails that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week, using money they'd stolen from my emergency fund. They looked relaxed and happy, like people without a care in the world, like people who hadn't just committed a crime against their own daughter. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money, this was about power and control and the fundamental belief that my life and my choices and my financial security were less important than their convenience. They'd taken my money because they could, because they'd always been able to override my autonomy whenever it suited them, and because they genuinely believed I should be grateful for the opportunity to fund their lifestyle. I walked home slowly, letting the rain wash away the last traces of the naive daughter who'd trusted her parents with her bank account information. By the time I reached my apartment building, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me 6 months ago. I was going to fight back, not with tears or family meetings or emotional appeals to their better nature, but with the same systematic determination they'd used to steal from me. If they wanted to play games with my money, I was about to teach them what a real game looked like. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a legal pad covered in notes. I'd spent the afternoon researching financial fraud laws in Oregon, reading about family theft statutes, and learning about the difference between civil and criminal charges. The rabbit hole of legal information was deeper than I'd expected, but one thing was becoming very clear. What my parents had done wasn't just morally wrong, it was illegal. Access to someone's bank account, even with passwords and emergency contact privileges, didn't give a person the right to take money without explicit permission. The fact that we were related didn't change the law. If anything, the systematic nature of the withdrawals over 6 months made it look worse, not better. I found myself taking notes in the margins of my legal pad, writing down questions to ask an attorney and documenting every detail I could remember about how my parents had gained access to my account. The more I wrote, the angrier I became. Not the hot, impulsive anger I'd felt during the phone call with my mother, but a cold, calculating fury that felt like it could sustain itself for months if necessary. My phone rang around 7 o'clock. Ethan's name appeared on the screen and I debated whether to answer. Part of me wanted to hear his voice, to have someone in my family who might take my side for once, but I knew better. Ethan had always been Switzerland in family conflicts, carefully neutral in a way that usually meant supporting whoever had the most power in the situation. "Hey Riley," he said when I picked up. His voice was cautious, the tone of someone who'd been briefed by our parents and was now tasked with damage control. "Mom called me. She said you guys had some kind of misunderstanding about money." "Misunderstanding," I repeat. "Is that what she's calling it? Look, I know you're upset, but maybe there's a way to work this out without getting all dramatic about it. Mom and Dad are just going through a tough time with the business right now, and I'm sure they meant to ask you before they borrowed the money." Borrow. As if taking money without permission was just a casual oversight, like forgetting to ask before eating someone's leftovers in the office refrigerator. "Ethan, they stole $18,000 from my savings account over 6 months. They changed my banking settings without telling me and withdrew money while I was at work so I wouldn't catch them." "How is that borrowing? 18,000? His voice shifted, and I could hear real surprise there. "Mom said it was just a few thousand for the vacation. She lied to you." "Just like she lied to me about paying it back before I noticed." I pulled up my banking records on my laptop screen, reading him the exact amounts and dates. "They've been taking money since May. Small amounts at first, then bigger chunks when they realized I wasn't checking carefully enough to catch them." There was a long pause. I could hear Emma talking in the background, something about dinner being ready, and the sound of their television playing some evening news program. Normal family sounds from a normal family evening, the kind of peaceful domestic scene I'd always imagined I'd have someday when I was financially stable enough to buy a house and settle down. That's a lot more than Mom made it sound like," Ethan said finally. "But Riley, come on, they're our parents. They raised us and took care of us. Don't you think going to the police is a little extreme? They didn't take care of me the same way they took care of you," I pointed out. "When's the last time they took money from your accounts without asking? When's the last time they expected you to fund their vacation? That's different." Emma and I have a baby on the way, and we just bought the house. Our financial situation is more complicated, and mine isn't. I'm trying to save for a house too, Ethan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm trying to build a life and have some security. Just like you. Why does your money matter more than mine? He didn't have an answer for that, which was answer enough. In the Thompson family hierarchy, my financial goals were considered optional while his were essential. My emergency fund was available for family use while his was protected by the sacred shield of impending fatherhood and mortgage payments. Look, he said after another pause, why don't you just give them some time to pay you back? They're good for it, you know that? Dad's business has been successful for 20 years. If the business is so successful, why did they need to steal my money in the first place? I asked. And if they're so good for it, why can't they pay me back immediately? Maybe they don't have that much liquid cash right now. Real estate can be cyclical, and maybe they're waiting for some deals to close. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. Ethan was making the same excuses our parents had trained him to make, defending their choices while dismissing my concerns. It was the same dynamic that had played out throughout our childhood. Ethan was the responsible one who deserved protection and consideration, while I was the dramatic one who needed to be more understanding and flexible. You know what, Ethan? If they don't have enough liquid cash to pay me back, maybe they shouldn't have gone on vacation with my money. Riley, come on. Don't be like this. Like what? Like someone who expects her family not to steal from her? Like someone who thinks her own money should be under her control? What exactly am I being like that's so unreasonable? You're being what? He trailed off, searching for the right word. Vindictive. It's not like you. Vindictive. There was that word again. The one my family always used when I refused to accept being treated poorly. Standing up for myself was vindictive. Expecting basic respect was vindictive. Wanting my own money back was vindictive. Maybe it's time I started being vindictive, I said quietly. Maybe I've been too accommodating for too long. After I hung up with Ethan, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment and thought about all the times I'd been told I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. All the family gatherings where Ethan's achievements were celebrated while my accomplishments were barely acknowledged. All the times I'd swallowed my frustration and accepted less than I deserved because keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. I thought about the emergency fund I'd built through years of careful choices and small sacrifice. I thought about the house I'd been planning to buy, the financial security I'd been working toward, the future I'd been building one deliberate decision at a time. My parents had stolen more than money from me. They'd stolen my sense of safety, my trust in family, and my belief that hard work and responsibility would be rewarded rather than exploited. But they'd also given me something unexpected, absolute clarity about who they really were and what I really meant to them. For the first time in my life, I could see the relationship clearly, without the fog of hope and obligation that had always clouded my judgment before. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Marcus Rivera, the attorney whose website I'd found during my afternoon of legal research. His practice specialized in financial crimes and family law, and his client testimonials included several cases similar to mine. The email was professional and factual, outlining the basic facts of my situation and requesting a consultation. By the time I finished writing, it was nearly 10 o'clock. I read through the email twice, checking for typos and making sure I'd included all the relevant details. Then I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and I could see stars beginning to appear through the breaking clouds. Tomorrow, I would start the process of fighting back against my own family. Tomorrow, I would learn whether the legal system would take my side, or whether being someone's daughter automatically made you less deserving of justice. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I was done being the understanding daughter who absorbed everyone else's problems and accepted whatever scraps of consideration my family was willing to offer. I was done funding other people's dreams while putting my own on hold. If my parents wanted to treat me like an enemy, I was finally ready to stop pretending we were on the same side. Marcus Rivera's office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Portland, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Willamette River. I arrived 20 minutes early for my Thursday morning appointment, partly because I wanted time to collect my thoughts and partly because I'd barely slept the night before. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional smile, offered me coffee while I waited in the modern lobby area. I declined the coffee, knowing my hands were already shaky enough from nerves and caffeine. Instead, I sat in one of the leather chairs and reviewed the folder of documents I'd prepared: bank statements, screenshots of text messages from my parents, printed emails, and a timeline I'd created, showing every withdrawal over the past 6 months. The folder felt substantial in my hands, like evidence that my story was real, and not just the product of family drama blown out of proportion. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus Rivera emerged from his office to greet me. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he'd handled cases like mine before. His handshake was firm, and his office was decorated with diplomas from Portland State University and several awards from the Oregon State Bar Association. "Miss Thompson, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from his desk. "I read through the details you provided in your email, and I have to say, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than most people realize. Family financial abuse often goes unreported because victims feel guilty about pursuing legal action against relatives." I opened my folder and spread the documents across his desk. I brought everything I could think of: bank statements going back a year, transaction records, even screenshots of the vacation photos they posted on social media while they were spending my money. Marcus picked up the bank statements first, scanning through the highlighted withdrawals with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what to look for. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed him making notes on a legal pad as he reviewed each document. "Walk me through how they gained access to your account," he said without looking up from the papers. "When did you give them your banking information? And what was the original purpose?" I explained about setting up the emergency contact information when I first opened the account in college, how my parents had convinced me it was a smart safety measure in case something happened to me. I told him about the phone call they'd made to increase my daily transfer limit, using the emergency contact privileges to authorize changes I'd never requested. "And you never gave them explicit permission to withdraw money for any purpose?" Marcus asked, finally looking up from the document. "Never. Not once. I didn't even know they had memorized my login information until this happened." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo my father had sent from Cabo. This was taken 3 days after they withdrew the last chunk of money. They were sitting at a resort restaurant posting about their amazing vacation, while I was discovering my emergency fund was gone. Marcus studied the photo for a moment, then made another note. "The timing is particularly damaging to any defense they might try to mount. It's hard to argue financial necessity when you're simultaneously posting luxury vacation photos on social media." He spent the next 20 minutes reviewing every document I'd brought, asking detailed questions about my relationship with my parents, the family business, and whether there had been any previous incidents of financial boundary violation. I found myself telling him about smaller things I'd previously dismissed: the time my mother had used my credit card for groceries without asking, claiming she'd forgotten her wallet; the occasions when my father had borrowed cash from my purse and forgotten to pay me back; the way family expenses always seemed to fall disproportionately on my shoulders compared to Ethan. "What you're describing is a pattern of financial enmeshment," Marcus explained. "Your parents have consistently treated your financial resources as available for family use without your consent. The current situation isn't an isolated incident, it's an escalation of existing behavior." I felt a wave of validation hearing my experiences described in clinical terms. For years I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive about money, too rigid about boundaries that other families might consider flexible. But Marcus was treating my concerns as legitimate legal issues, not personality flaws. "So what are my options?" I asked. "You have several paths available," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The most straightforward is filing a police report for theft and fraud. What your parents did meets the legal definition of both crimes. The systematic nature of the withdrawals over 6 months, combined with the deception involved in changing your account settings, makes this a clear case of financial fraud. My stomach lurched at the word police. Despite everything, the thought of my parents being arrested felt surreal and terrifying. What would happen if I filed a police report? The district attorney would review the case and decide whether to press charges. Given the amount of money involved and the clear paper trail, I'd expect them to take it seriously. Your parents could face felony charges, which carry the possibility of jail time and significant fines. He paused, studying my expression. I can see that possibility troubles you, which is completely understandable. Many people in your situation struggle with the idea of criminalizing family members, even when those family members have committed crimes. Is there another option that doesn't involve the police? Yeah, we can file a civil lawsuit for recovery of the stolen funds, plus damages and attorney fees. The advantage is that it's a private matter between you and your parents, handled in civil court rather than criminal court. The disadvantage is that it might take longer to resolve and there's no guarantee of full recovery even if we win. I thought about my parents sitting in that restaurant in Cabo, drinks in hand, completely unconcerned about the financial devastation they'd left behind. I thought about my mother's dismissive tone when she'd suggested a $500 monthly payment plan, as if my stolen money was a minor inconvenience they could address at their leisure. What if they refused to cooperate with a civil lawsuit? Then we move to criminal charges, Marcus said simply. Sometimes the threat of police involvement motivates people to resolve civil matters more cooperatively. We could start with a demand letter outlining the civil case and mentioning that criminal charges remain an option if they don't respond appropriately. The demand letter approach felt like the right middle ground, serious enough to get their attention, but not so nuclear that it would immediately destroy any possibility of family reconciliation. Not that I was particularly interested in reconciliation at this point, but I wanted to give them one chance to do the right thing before I brought the full weight of the legal system down on them. How much would a civil lawsuit cost? I asked, already dreading the answer. My retainer for a case like this is typically $5,000, with additional fees depending on how complex the litigation becomes. If we win, we can seek recovery of attorney fees as part of the judgment, but there's no guarantee the court will award them. $5,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. I needed to spend a significant amount of money to try to recover the money my parents had stolen, and I could only afford to do so because they hadn't managed to steal every penny I owned. If they'd taken another $5,000, I wouldn't have been able to hire an attorney at all. I want to move forward with the demand letter, I decided. If they ignore it or refuse to pay, then we escalate to a full lawsuit. Marcus nodded approvingly. I think that's a wise approach. We'll give them 10 business days to respond with a plan for full restitution. If they don't respond or if their response is inadequate, we file suit immediately. We spent another hour going over the details of the demand letter and discussing strategy. Marcus explained that the letter would need to be formal and specific, outlining exactly what my parents had done, what laws they had broken, and what consequences they could face if they didn't make immediate restitution. He would send it via certified mail to both their home address and the business address, ensuring they couldn't claim they never received it. By the time I left his office, I felt simultaneously empowered and exhausted. For the first time since discovering the theft, I had a concrete plan and professional representation. But I also knew that moving forward with legal action would fundamentally change my relationship with my family forever. There would be no going back to the way things were before, no pretending that what they'd done was just a misunderstanding or a temporary cash flow problem. I walked back to my car through the busy downtown streets, dodging pedestrians, and trying to process the magnitude of what I just set in motion. Portland's financial district buzzed with the energy of people conducting legitimate business, making honest deals, treating each other with basic professional respect. The contrast with my family's behavior felt stark and depressing. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe Kim, my closest friend at Nexus Creative. How did the lawyer meeting go? Coffee after work? I realized I'd been so focused on the legal aspects of my situation that I hadn't really talked to anyone about the emotional impact. Zoe was one of the few people who knew about my family dynamics, having listened to me vent about various Thompson family gatherings over the past 2 years. She'd always been a good sounding board, offering perspective without judgment. I texted back, definitely need coffee, and possibly one. Long story. The rest of my workday passed in a blur of routine tasks that felt surreal given the morning's event. I sat through meetings about digital marketing campaigns, and client proposals, while part of my brain was still processing the fact that I'd just hired an attorney to sue my own parents. My colleagues chatted about their lunch plans and weekend activities, normal workplace conversations that felt like they were happening in a different universe from the one I was currently inhabiting. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number with a Mexico country code. I let it go to voicemail, suspecting it was one of my parents calling from their resort. When I checked the message during my afternoon break, I was right. It was my father's voice, artificially cheerful and slightly slurred from what sounded like day drink. "Hey Riley, it's Dad calling from beautiful Cabo San Lucas. Your mother told me about your little money concern and I wanted to reach out and let you know everything's going to be fine. We're having some great meetings down here with potential clients, and this trip is really going to pay off for the business. We'll get you sorted out as soon as we're back, okay? No need to worry about anything. Love you, kiddo." I listened to the message 3 times, each playback making me angrier than the last. Little money concern. As if $18,000 was pocket change. As if his reassurance that everything would be fine meant anything when he was the one who'd created the problem in the first place. The casual, patronizing tone suggested he genuinely believed I would just wait patiently for them to return from their stolen money vacation and accept whatever payment arrangement they found convenient. I forwarded the voicemail to Marcus Rivera with a note. Additional evidence of their attitude toward the theft. Note the timing and location of the call. By 5:30 I was sitting across from Zoe at our usual coffee shop in the Pearl District, nursing a large cappuccino and trying to figure out where to begin. Zoe was a few years older than me, with the kind of straightforward personality that made her excellent at both digital marketing and cutting through emotional complications. She listened without interrupting as I told her about the bank call, the lawyer meeting, and my parents' complete lack of remorse. "Jesus, Riley," she said when I finished. "I knew your family had some weird dynamics, but this is straight-up criminal behavior. Are you doing okay?" "I think so. I mean, I'm angry and hurt and completely shocked, but I also feel like I'm finally seeing the situation clearly for the first time." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, grateful for the warmth. "Does that make sense?" "Complete sense. Sometimes it takes something really egregious to make you realize that smaller boundary violations weren't actually okay either." Zoe had gone through her own family drama a few years earlier when her parents had tried to pressure her into loaning them money for a business venture she knew was doomed to fail. "So what's your lawyer's strategy?" I explained about the demand letter and the timeline Marcus had outlined. Zoe nodded approvingly, but her expression grew concerned when I mentioned the $5,000 retainer. "Can you afford that on top of everything else they've taken?" "Barely. I'll have to use most of what's left in my checking account, but Marcus said we can seek attorney fees as part of any judgment." I stirred my coffee absently, watching the foam swirl around the edges. "The alternative is just accepting that they stole from me and hoping they eventually pay me back out of the goodness of their hearts, which they've already demonstrated they don't have," Zoe pointed out. "I think you're doing the right thing, even though it sucks that you have to spend money to get your money back." We talked for another hour about practical considerations, whether I should tell anyone else in my family about the legal action, how to handle workplace stress while dealing with family crisis, and what I would do if my parents completely cut me off financially and emotionally. Zoe offered to be my emergency contact if I needed someone to call during court proceedings, and she made me promise to keep her updated on how things progressed. Walking home from the coffee shop, I felt steadier than I had all week. Having someone validate my decision to fight back made the whole situation feel less isolating and surreal. Zoe was right that I was doing the right thing, even if it was expensive and emotionally complicated. Back in my apartment, I found an email from Marcus with a draft of the demand letter for my review. Reading it was both satisfying and sobering. The formal legal language made my parents' actions sound appropriately serious and criminal, but it also drove home the reality that I was officially in conflict with my family. The letter outlined every withdrawal in chronological order, explained the laws that had been broken, and demanded full restitution within 10 business days. It mentioned potential criminal charges and civil damages in language that was professional but unmistakably threatening. At the bottom, Marcus had included his law firm's letterhead and bar certification numbers, making it clear that this wasn't an empty threat from an angry daughter but a formal legal action backed by professional representation. I approved the letter via email and asked Marcus to send it the next morning. Then I settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and tried to imagine my parents' faces when they received certified mail from a law firm while they were still lounging on the beach with my money. Friday morning brought gray skies and the kind of persistent drizzle that made Portland feel like it was wrapped in wet cotton. I checked my email obsessively, looking for confirmation that Marcus had sent the demand letter, but I knew it would take at least a day for my parents to receive it, and probably longer for them to respond. Work provided a welcome distraction from the constant anxiety of waiting. I had a major campaign launch to coordinate, which required enough focus and attention to detail that I couldn't spend the whole day refreshing my email and wondering what my parents were doing. My colleagues seemed to sense that I was going through something stressful, offering to grab coffee and generally being more supportive than usual, but I appreciated that no one pressed me for details. Around noon I got a text from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister who lived in Seattle. Patty had always been the fun aunt, the one who remembered birthdays and sent care packages during college. She was also one of the few family members who'd ever questioned the obvious favoritism my parents showed toward Ethan. "Hey sweetie, your mom called me this morning sounding upset about some kind of money issue. She said you're threatening legal action over a family loan. Can you give me a call when you have a chance? I'd love to hear your side of the story." I stared at the text for several minutes, wondering how my mother had described the situation to Patty, probably as a misunderstanding that had gotten blown out of proportion by an ungrateful daughter who didn't understand how family finances work. Certainly not as theft and fraud committed over 6 months by parents who'd systematically violated their daughter's financial boundaries, but Patty was asking for my side of the story, which was more consideration than I'd gotten from anyone else in my family. I called her during my lunch break, stepping outside into the drizzle for privacy. "Riley, honey, what's going on?" Patty's voice was warm and concerned, without the edge of judgment I'd heard from everyone else. "Your mother made it sound like you're suing them over borrowed money, but that doesn't sound like something you'd do unless something was really wrong." I gave her the full story, starting with the bank call and ending with the demand letter. Patty listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or dismay. When I finished, there was a long silence. $18,000, she said finally. "Riley, that's not borrowing money from family, that's that." "Thank you," I said, feeling tears of relief spring to my eyes. "Everyone else keeps acting like I'm being dramatic or vindictive for wanting my money back. You're not being dramatic. If someone who wasn't related to you had done this, you wouldn't hesitate to call the police. The fact that they're your parents doesn't make it legal or acceptable." Patty's voice had gotten firmer, and I could hear genuine anger there. "And the way they're handling it, going on vacation with your money and then acting like you should just wait patiently for them to pay you back, that's unconscionable." I found myself crying in the parking lot behind my office building, partly from stress and partly from the overwhelming relief of having someone in my family take my side. Patty let me cry for a few minutes, making soothing sounds, and telling me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. "Has this kind of thing happened before?" she asked when I'd calmed down. "Not to this extent, but yes, smaller amounts, usually. And they've always had this attitude, that my money is available for family use in a way that Ethan's isn't." I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my jacket, grateful that the drizzle was disguising the fact that I'd been crying. "I think I've been too accommodating for too long. Your parents have always had a blind spot when it comes to treating you fairly compared to Ethan," Patty said carefully. "I've noticed it at family gatherings, but I didn't realize it extended to financial abuse. I should have said something soon." We talked for another 20 minutes about family dynamics and boundary setting. Patty offered to try talking to my parents when they returned from vacation, though she warned me that my mother had a tendency to double down when confronted rather than admitting she was wrong. She also offered to serve as a character witness if the legal case went to trial, which meant more to me than I could express. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that you're doing the right thing," she said before we hung up. "Family doesn't give anyone the right to steal from you or treat you like your financial security doesn't matter." The weekend passed slowly, filled with anxious energy I couldn't quite channel into productive activity. I cleaned my apartment twice, went for long walks along the waterfront, and caught up on Netflix shows that couldn't hold my attention. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting either an angry call from my parents or an update from Marcus about their response to the demand letter. Neither happened. My parents' social media accounts continued to feature photos of beach activities and resort dining, with no indication that they'd received legal papers or were planning to cut their vacation short to deal with the crisis they'd created. The silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that was building just out of sight. Sunday evening, I got a call from Ethan. His voice was strained when I answered, lacking the careful neutrality he'd maintained during our previous conversation. "Riley, what the hell is going on?" Mom called me crying, saying you sent lawyers after them while they're on vacation. She said, "You're trying to destroy the family over money." "I'm trying to get my stolen money back," I corrected. "Did she mention that part? The $18,000 they took without permission?" She said it was a temporary loan that got miscommunicated. She said you knew they were having cash flow problems with the business and that you'd agreed to help out. Ethan's voice carried a note of desperation, like he was hoping I'd confirm this version of events so he wouldn't have to deal with the reality of what our parents had done. "That's a lie, Ethan. They never asked permission, never mentioned business problems, and certainly never got my agreement to fund their vacation." I felt tired suddenly, exhausted by the constant need to defend myself against their revisionist history. They changed my banking settings without telling me and withdrew money while I was at work. How is that a miscommunication? Maybe there's been a misunderstanding about the amounts or the timeline, he suggested weakly. Maybe if you just talk to them directly instead of involving lawyers. I did talk to them directly. Mom told me I was being unreasonable and offered to pay me back $500 a month for 3 years. Like I should be grateful for the opportunity to give them an interest-free loan of money they stole from me. There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear Emma asking if everything was okay and Ethan making shushing sounds. Their normal, peaceful Sunday evening was being disrupted by our family's dysfunction, and I could tell he resented me for bringing chaos into his carefully controlled world. "Riley, I know you're angry, but think about what you're doing here. If you pursue this legal thing, it's going to destroy our family. Mom and Dad could go to jail. The business could be ruined. Is getting your money back really worth all that?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of family programming that had taught me to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own well-being. Ethan wasn't asking whether what our parents had done was wrong, he was asking whether I cared more about justice than about maintaining the family facade that protected everyone except me. "Yes," I said quietly. "Getting my money back is worth, and maybe if Mom and Dad go to jail they'll learn that stealing from family has consequences." Jesus, Riley, I don't even recognize you anymore. Since when are you this vindictive? There was that word again, vindictive, as if expecting basic honesty and respect from family was somehow cruel and unusual, as if I was the one causing problems by refusing to be stolen from quietly. Since my own parents stole $18,000 from me and then acted like I should thank them for it, maybe you should ask yourself why you're more concerned about protecting thieves than supporting their victim. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. The family was closing ranks, just as I'd expected they would. Everyone was more concerned about avoiding consequences than addressing the behavior that had created the crisis in the first place. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about their approval or their comfort. I had an attorney, I had evidence, and I had the law on my side. If they wanted to paint me as the villain for refusing to be victimized quietly, that was their choice to make. I was done being the accommodating daughter who absorbed everyone else's problems and accepted whatever scraps of consideration my family was willing to offer. My parents had taught me a valuable lesson about power and respect, even if it wasn't the lesson they'd intended to teach. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made Portland feel alive and electric. I woke up before my alarm, energized by nervous anticipation rather than dread for the first time in weeks. Today would mark exactly 10 business days since Marcus had sent the demand letter, which meant my parents' deadline for responding would expire at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I checked my email while brewing coffee, looking for any communication from Marcus or, less likely, direct contact from my parents. Nothing yet, but it was still early. I dressed carefully for work, choosing a navy blazer that made me feel professional and confident. Whatever happened today, I wanted to feel prepared and in control. The morning passed with unusual productivity. Having a concrete deadline focused my mind in a way that endless uncertainty hadn't. Either my parents would respond with a plan for full restitution by 5 o'clock, or Marcus and I would file a civil lawsuit first thing Tuesday morning. The simplicity of it felt liberating after weeks of emotional complexity and family manipulation. Around 11, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Oregon number. "This is Catherine. We need to talk. Can you meet me for lunch today? Pioneer Courthouse Square, 12:30. I stared at the message for several minutes, trying to decode the tone and implication. My mother had never texted me from an unknown number before, which suggested she was either using a borrowed phone or had gotten a new number while traveling. More significantly, she was back in Portland, which meant they'd cut their vacation short to deal with the legal pressure. I forwarded the text to Marcus with a note asking for advice about meeting with her. His response came back within minutes. "You're under no obligation to meet, but if you do, keep it brief and don't agree to anything without consulting me first. Consider recording the conversation if Oregon's one-party consent law applies." I looked up Oregon's recording laws on my phone and confirmed that I could legally record a conversation as long as I was a participant. The idea of secretly recording my own mother felt surreal and slightly sick-making, but I'd learned that protecting myself required documentation my parents couldn't later dispute or reframe. I texted back, "I'll be there." Pioneer Courthouse Square buzzed with the usual lunchtime energy of downtown Portland. Food trucks lined the surrounding streets. Office workers hurried between meetings with takeout containers, and tourists clustered around the information kiosk. I arrived 5 minutes early and positioned myself near the central fountain where I could see all the main entrances to the square. Catherine appeared at exactly 12:30, walking briskly from the direction of the parking garage. She looked smaller than I remembered, somehow diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature. Her usually immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, hair not quite perfectly styled, makeup that looked hastily applied, clothes that were expensive but wrinkled from travel. "Riley," she said when she reached me, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for meeting me, Mom." I kept my own voice neutral, resisting the automatic impulse to ask about her trip or comment on her early return. "You wanted to talk." She glanced around the busy square, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting. "Can we go somewhere more private? Maybe that coffee shop?" She gestured toward a Starbucks on the corner. "Here is fine," I said. I'd chosen the public location deliberately, knowing that my mother's obsession with appearances would prevent her from making a scene in front of strangers. "What did you want to discuss?" Catherine's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't used to me refusing her requests or controlling the terms of our interactions. "I want to understand why you felt it was necessary to involve lawyers in a family matter. Surely we could have worked this out between ourselves." "We tried that. You offered me a payment plan for money you stole from me, and you acted like I should be grateful for the opportunity." I started the recording app on my phone, keeping it in my jacket pocket. "How exactly did you think we were going to work it out?" "Don't use that word," she said sharply. "We didn't steal anything. We borrowed money from family during a temporary cash flow crisis. That's completely different. Borrowing requires permission. What you did was take money without asking, and then inform me after the fact. That's theft, not borrowing." I watched her face carefully, noting the way her jaw clenched when I refused to accept her reframing of the situation. "You're being deliberately obtuse," Catherine said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "You know we would never do anything to truly harm you. We're your parents. We love you. If you love me, why did you take my emergency fund without permission? If you love me, why did you lie to the bank to change my account setting? If you love me, why are you on vacation with my money while I'm hiring lawyers to get it back?" Each question hit like a small slap, and I could see her composure cracking around the edges. Catherine wasn't used to being cross-examined by her own daughter, wasn't prepared for me to be logical and persistent instead of emotional and manipulative. "We came back early from our trip to deal with this situation," she said, as if cutting their vacation short was some great sacrifice that should earn my gratitude. "We're prepared to make arrangements for repayment that work for everyone." "What kind of arrangement?" "We can start with $1,000 a month beginning in January. The business should be in better shape by then, and we'll be able to handle larger payments. Catherine spoke with the confidence of someone making a generous offer, apparently unaware that she was proposing to take a year and a half to pay back money she'd stolen. That's not acceptable, I said flatly. I want all $18,000 back immediately, plus interest and attorney fees. Be reasonable, Riley. We don't have $18,000 sitting in a checking account. Real estate is a complex business with seasonal fluctuations and tied-up capital. $1,000 a month is a responsible offer that takes our other obligations into account. Your other obligations? I felt my voice rising slightly and forced myself to stay calm. What about your obligation not to steal from your daughter in the first place? Catherine looked around nervously, clearly worried that people might overhear our conversation. Keep your voice down. You're making a scene. I'm having a conversation about getting my stolen money back. If that feels like a scene to you, maybe you shouldn't have stolen it. We stood there in silence for a moment, watching office workers and tourists flow around us like water around rocks in a stream. Normal people going about their normal business, conducting their relationships with basic honesty and respect. The contrast with my family's dysfunction felt overwhelming. Your father is very upset about this legal threat, Catherine said finally, switching tactics. This kind of stress isn't good for his blood pressure. Do you really want to risk his health over money? The guilt manipulation was so transparent that I almost laughed. My father's health concerns, which I'd never heard mentioned before this moment, were apparently more important than the $18,000 he'd helped steal from me. If Dad's health is a concern, maybe he should have thought about that before committing fraud, I replied. I'm not responsible for managing the consequences of his choices. This is what I mean about you being unreasonable, Catherine said, her voice getting sharp. You're talking about your father like he's some kind of criminal instead of the man who raised you and provided for you. He is a criminal. Taking money without permission is a crime, regardless of who does it or what their relationship is to the victim. I pulled out my phone and made a show of checking the time. You have about 4 hours to transfer $18,000 to my account. After that, my lawyer files a civil lawsuit. Catherine's face went pale. You can't be serious. You'd actually sue your own parent. They actually stole from their own daughter, so yes, I'll sue them if that's what it takes to get my money back. Riley, please, think about what this would do to the family. Think about Ethan and Emma and the baby. Do you want your nephew to grow up knowing his aunt destroyed the family over money? Another manipulation tactic, this time using my unborn nephew as emotional leverage. The suggestion that I was destroying the family, rather than responding to my parents' destruction of basic trust and honesty, was so backwards that it took my breath away. I'm not destroying anything, I said quietly. You and Dad destroyed my trust when you stole from me. You destroyed my sense of family safety when you violated my financial boundaries. You destroyed our relationship when you decided my money was available for your use without my permission. I'm just responding to the destruction you already caused. Catherine stared at me like I was a stranger, which I supposed I was. The accommodating daughter who absorbed family problems without complaint was gone, replaced by someone who expected basic respect and honesty. She clearly didn't know how to interact with this new version of me. I don't know what's gotten into you, she said finally. This isn't like you at all. Maybe it should have been like me all along. Maybe I should have been standing up for myself years ago instead of accepting whatever treatment you decided I deserved. We always treated you fairly, Catherine protested. We gave you the same opportunities as Ethan. Did you take money from Ethan's accounts without permission? Did you expect him to fund family expenses while protecting his financial security? Did you offer him payment plans when you owed him money? The questions hung in the air between us, unanswered, because we both knew what the truth was. Ethan's situation is different. He has responsibilities, and I don't. I don't have bills and goals and the need for financial security. I felt my carefully maintained composure starting to crack. Why does his money matter more than mine? Catherine opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time in the conversation, she seemed to realize that her usual justifications weren't going to work. She couldn't explain why Ethan's financial autonomy was sacred while mine was optional without revealing the fundamental unfairness of how she'd always treated her children. We need more time, she said finally. $18,000 isn't something we can produce immediately, even if we wanted to. Can't you give us 60 days? You had 60 days. You had 6 months while you were stealing from me, and you chose to spend the money on vacation instead of addressing whatever business problems supposedly made the theft necessary. I started walking toward the street, done with the circular conversation. You have until 5 o'clock to transfer the money. After that, my lawyer handles it. Riley, wait. Catherine hurried to catch up with me. What if we can get you half by 5 o'clock and the rest within 30 days? Would that be acceptable? I stopped walking and turned to face her. Where would you get $9,000 by 5 o'clock if your business is having such serious cash flow problems? The question clearly caught her off guard. If they could produce half the money within hours, it meant the financial crisis story was largely fictional. They had access to funds. They simply hadn't prioritized paying me back. We could liquidate some investments, Catherine said carefully. It wouldn't be ideal for the business, but family is more important than investment return. Family is more important than investment returns, but family apparently isn't important enough to prevent you from stealing from me in the first place. I shook my head. No partial payments. $18,000 by 5 o'clock, or I'll see you in court. I walked away without giving her a chance to respond, heading back toward my office through the busy downtown streets. My hands were shaking from adrenaline, but I felt clearer and more determined than I had in weeks. The conversation had confirmed everything I'd suspected about my parents' priorities and their attitude toward my financial autonomy. Back at my desk, I sent Marcus a detailed summary of the conversation, including key quotes and Catherine's admission that they could access investment funds if necessary. He responded quickly with approval of how I'd handled the meeting, and confirmation that he was prepared to file suit if they missed the deadline. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. I checked my bank account obsessively, refreshing the page every few minutes to see if any deposits had appeared. My phone stayed silent, except for work-related messages, and a supportive text from Zoe asking how the deadline day was going. At 4:45, with 15 minutes left until the deadline, my phone rang. Marcus Rivera's name appeared on the screen. Riley, I just received a call from your parents' attorney, he said without preamble. They've retained David Walsh from Walsh & Associates. He's requesting a meeting to discuss settlement options. My heart sank. Hiring their own lawyer meant my parents were preparing for a prolonged legal battle rather than simply paying me back. It also meant they were taking the threat seriously enough to spend money on professional representation. What kind of settlement options? I asked. He didn't provide specifics over the phone, but he indicated they're prepared to make a substantial payment immediately with a structured plan for the remainder. He's proposing a meeting tomorrow morning to present their offer formally. I looked at my computer clock, 4:47. They're cutting it pretty close to the deadline. That's intentional. They want to create the impression that they're negotiating in good faith while buying themselves more time. Marcus's voice was dry with professional skepticism. The question is whether you want to hear their offer or proceed with filing suit. I thought about Catherine's demeanor during our lunch meeting, the way she'd tried every manipulation tactic in her repertoire before finally admitting they could access investment funds. They weren't acting like people who were genuinely unable to pay. They were acting like people who didn't want to pay, and were hoping to minimize their costs through negotiation. What's your recommendation? If they make a good faith offer tomorrow that includes immediate substantial payment and a reasonable timeline for the rest, it might be worth considering. Legal proceedings can be expensive and time-consuming even when you win, but if their offer is inadequate or obviously designed to string you along, we file suit immediately. And what constitutes a good faith offer? At minimum, half the money within a week and the remainder within 60 days, plus attorney fees and interest. Anything less than that, and they're not serious about resolving this quickly. I agreed to the meeting, knowing that I could always file suit afterward if their offer was insufficient. But I also suspected that my parents were about to learn an expensive lesson about the difference between family negotiation and legal negotiation. At exactly 5:00 p.m. my phone chimed with a text from Catherine. We've retained legal representation and requested a settlement meeting. This shows we're committed to resolving this matter fairly. I didn't respond. There was nothing fair about what they'd done, and I doubted there would be anything fair about whatever offer they were preparing to make. Tuesday morning's settlement meeting took place in a sterile conference room at Walsh & Associates, a mid-tier law firm housed in a glass office building near the river. I arrived with Marcus, feeling simultaneously nervous and determined. This would be the first time I'd seen my father since discovering the theft, and I wasn't sure how that encounter would affect my resolve. David Walsh turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with gray hair, and the kind of measured demeanor that suggested extensive experience with family financial disputes. He greeted Marcus and me professionally, then gestured toward the conference table where my parents were already seated. My father looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, pale complexion, and clothes that hung loose like he'd lost weight in the past week. He wouldn't make eye contact with me, instead staring down at his hands clasped on the table in front of him. Catherine sat rigidly upright, her face set in an expression of determined dignity that didn't quite hide her underlying anxiety. "Thank you all for coming," Walsh began once we were seated. "My clients understand that their daughter feels wronged by recent financial transactions, and they're committed to finding a resolution that works for everyone." Marcus raised an eyebrow at the euphemistic language but didn't comment. I appreciated his restraint. Starting with an argument about terminology wouldn't help us get to the substance of their offer. My clients acknowledged that they should have communicated more clearly about their temporary need for funds. Walsh continued. They're prepared to make a substantial immediate payment and establish a reasonable timeline for full restitution. What specific amount and timeline are we discussing? Marcus asked. Walsh consulted his note. They can transfer $5,000 to Riley's account this afternoon, and an additional $1,000 per month for the following 13 months. This plan would provide full repayment within 14 months while respecting their business cash flow requirements. I felt my jaw clench. $5,000 immediately and 13 more months of payments meant they were still proposing to take over a year to pay back money they'd stolen. It also meant they were only offering to pay back the principal amount, with no interest, attorney fees, or acknowledgement of the financial harm they'd caused. That's completely inadequate, Marcus said before I could respond. Your clients withdrew $18,000 over 6 months, spending it on luxury vacation travel while Ms. Thompson was forced to hire legal representation to recover her own money. A 14-month repayment plan with no interest or fees is essentially asking her to provide them with an interest-free loan of money they took without permission. The funds were taken during a genuine business emergency, Walsh replied smoothly. My clients were confident they could repay the money quickly, but market conditions have made full immediate restitution challenging. If there was a genuine business emergency, why did they use the money for vacation travel? I asked. And why didn't they ask permission before taking it? Walsh glanced at my parents before responding. There may have been some miscommunication about the purpose and authorization of the transfers. My clients believed they had tacit permission based on previous family financial arrangements. What previous arrangements? Marcus demanded. Thompson has provided bank records showing no history of large withdrawals or transfers prior to this incident. The room fell silent. Walsh was clearly struggling to construct a narrative that made his clients look reasonable without directly contradicting the documented evidence. My parents sat frozen, probably realizing for the first time that their usual family manipulation tactics wouldn't work in a room full of lawyers with paper trails. Look, my father said suddenly, his voice hoarse and tired. We made a mistake. We should have asked first. But we're family, and families help each other out. Riley acts like we're strangers who robbed her bank account. You are strangers who robbed my bank account, I replied quietly. Family members don't steal from each other and then expect gratitude for offering to pay it back slowly. We never meant for you to find out before we could pay it back, he continued, as if that made the theft better rather than worse. We thought we could replace the money quickly and you'd never know the difference. Marcus leaned forward. Miss Thompson, are you saying you deliberately concealed these transactions from your daughter? My father's face went even paler as he realized he'd just admitted to intentional deception. Walsh touched his arm in a warning gesture, but the damage was done. I think what my client means, Walsh said quickly, is that they intended to handle the repayment privately without causing Riley any stress or inconvenience. By stress or inconvenience, do you mean the stress and inconvenience of having her emergency fund stolen? I asked. Because that's what happened regardless of their intentions. Catherine finally spoke up, her voice sharp with frustration. We came here to make a good faith offer, And you're treating us like criminals. We're offering to pay you back with interest. There was no mention of interest in the offer, Marcus pointed out. And you're not offering to pay her back. You're offering to eventually pay her back over more than a year while she absorbs the cost of legal representation and the lost opportunity cost of the stolen fund. What would you consider a reasonable offer? Walsh asked, clearly realizing that their initial proposal wasn't going to be accepted. Marcus consulted his note. $10,000 within 1 week, the remaining $8,000 within 60 days, plus interest calculated at the legal rate, plus attorney fees. Miss Thompson has already incurred significant costs trying to recover her own money. That's impossible, Catherine said immediately. We don't have $10,000 just sitting around, but you had $18,000 to spend on vacation, I asked. That was different. We had already paid for the trip, and we couldn't get refund. Her voice carried the same patronizing tone I remembered from our lunch meeting, as if I should understand that vacation expenses were somehow more important than repaying stolen money. You paid for the trip with my money, I pointed out, money you took without permission. Walsh held up a hand to prevent further argument. Let me consult with my clients privately for a moment. Marcus and I stepped outside the conference room and waited in the hallway while my parents huddled with their attorney. Through the glass walls I could see animated discussion, with Catherine gesturing emphatically and my father shaking his head repeatedly. How do you think it's going? I asked. Marcus, they're realizing that this isn't a family negotiation where emotional manipulation works, he replied. Walsh knows their position is weak, and he's probably explaining the realities of what could happen if we file suit. After 15 minutes, Walsh called us back into the conference room. My parents looked even more strained than before, and Catherine's carefully maintained composure had cracked enough to show genuine anxiety. My clients are prepared to transfer $7,000 immediately, and the remaining $11,000 within 90 days. Walsh announced. They'll also cover reasonable attorney fees up to $2,000. It was a better offer, but still not adequate. They were asking for 3 months to pay back money they'd stolen, and their definition of reasonable attorney fees was less than half of what I'd actually incurred. $9,000 immediately, $9,000 within 30 days, plus full attorney fees and legal interest. Marcus countered, that's our final offer before we file suit. The room erupted in whispered arguments between my parents and their lawyer. Catherine kept shaking her head and gesturing toward me, while my father looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Walsh was clearly trying to manage his client's expectations while negotiating a resolution that wouldn't result in criminal charges. We need time to consider this, Walsh said finally. Can we have until tomorrow morning to respond? You can have until noon today, Marcus replied. After that, we file suit and any settlement discussions will need to include additional damages for the delay. As we prepared to leave, my father stood up suddenly. Riley, can I talk to you for just a minute? Privately, I looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. I'll wait in the hallway. When we were alone, my father's composure finally broke completely. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I know we screwed up, I know we hurt you, but please don't destroy our lives over this. The business can't survive a lawsuit, and your mother's health couldn't handle criminal charges. Then you should have thought about that before you stole from me, I replied. And you definitely should have thought about it before you spent my money on vacation, instead of paying me back immediately. We were scared, he admitted. We got in over our heads with some investments, and we panicked. We thought we could fix it quietly and you'd never have to know. I might have helped you if you'd asked, I said quietly. I might have actually loaned you the money if you'd been honest about needing it. But you chose to steal instead of asking, and then you chose to lie about it instead of apologizing. Those were your choices, not mine. He nodded miserably, tears starting to form in his eyes. I know we handled everything wrong, but you're our daughter. Doesn't that count for something? It should have counted for something when you were deciding whether to steal from me, I replied. Now it just makes what you did worse, not better. I left him standing in the conference room and walked out to join Marcus in the hallway. As we rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. Seeing my father break down had been difficult, but it had also confirmed that they understood the seriousness of what they'd done. How are you feeling about their final offer? Marcus asked as we reached our cars. "I want to see if they accept your counter offer. But if they don't, I'm ready to file suit. I'm done being accommodating about my own money." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. Sometimes the only way to get people to take you seriously is to show them you're willing to follow through on consequence." I drove back to work with the radio off, needing silence to process everything that had happened. In a few hours I'd know whether my parents were ready to pay me back promptly, or whether I'd be spending the next several months in litigation against my own family. Either way, I was no longer the daughter who would accept being stolen from quietly. That version of Riley Thompson was gone forever, and I couldn't bring myself to mourn her loss. At 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Marcus's noon deadline, my phone rang with a call from David Wall. I was sitting in my car in the Nexus Creative parking lot, having stepped outside to avoid any potential drama in front of my coworkers. My hands were steady as I answered, but my heart was racing with anticipation. "Thompson, my clients have agreed to your attorney's terms," Walsh said without preamble. "$9,000 will be transferred to your account within 2 hours, with the remainder due in 30 days, plus attorney fees and legal interest as specified." I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest, feeling a mixture of relief and vindication wash over me. "And they understand that failure to meet the 30-day deadline will result in immediate legal action." "Yes, they understand completely. I'll be sending a formal settlement agreement to Mr. Rivera within the hour, and we can execute it as soon as you've both reviewed the terms." After ending the call, I sat in my car for several minutes, staring out at the gray December sky and trying to process what had just happened. My parents had capitulated completely, agreeing to pay back the money on my timeline rather than theirs. It was a victory, but it felt hollow somehow, like winning a game I'd never wanted to play in the first place. I called Marcus to confirm the settlement terms and schedule a time to review the agreement. Then I texted Zoe with a simple message. They agreed to pay. Details at dinner tonight. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine work tasks that felt surreal given the morning's event. I attended meetings about holiday marketing campaigns and responded to client emails while part of my brain was still processing the fact that I'd just forced my own parents to hire a lawyer to negotiate returning money they'd stolen from me. Around 3 p.m., my bank's mobile app sent a notification that a deposit had been made to my account. I opened the app with trembling fingers and saw it, $9,000 from Thompson Real Estate Group, along with a separate transfer of $3,200 labeled legal fees, R. Thompson settlement. Seeing the money actually appear in my account felt anticlimactic after weeks of anxiety and legal maneuvering. It was just numbers on a screen, digital confirmation that my parents had finally acknowledged their theft and begun making restitution. But those numbers also represented something more significant, proof that standing up for myself had been the right choice, even when everyone in my family had pressured me to be more accommodating. I called Marcus to confirm receipt of the initial payment, and he informed me that the settlement agreement was ready for my signature. We scheduled a meeting for the following morning to finalize the paperwork and discuss next steps for ensuring the final payment would be made on schedule. That evening, Zoe and I met at a wine bar in the Pearl District, settling into a corner booth where we could talk without being overheard. I gave her the full update on the settlement negotiations, the attorney meetings, and my parents' complete reversal from defiance to capitulation. "So they just gave up?" Zoe asked, swirling her Pinot Noir thoughtfully. "After all that drama about family loyalty and business cash flow problems, they found $9,000 in 12 hours? Apparently so. Which proves that the financial crisis story was mostly fabrication designed to make me feel guilty for wanting my money back." I took a sip of my wine, savoring both the taste and the irony. "They could have paid me back immediately at any point over the past 6 months. They chose not to because they thought I wouldn't fight back, and now they know better," Zoe observed. "Question is, what happens to your relationship with them going forward? Are you planning to rebuild things once the money is fully repaid?" I'd been avoiding thinking about that question, focusing instead on the immediate goal of getting my money back. But now that the end was in sight, I had to confront the reality that my relationship with my parents was fundamentally changed, probably permanently. "I don't know," I admit. "Part of me wants to try to rebuild something, because they're still my family, But another part of me recognizes that this wasn't just about money. This was about basic respect and boundaries, and I'm not sure they're capable of treating me as an equal rather than as someone whose resources are available for their use. Have they even apologized? Zoe asked. Like, actually apologized for stealing from you, not just apologized for the misunderstanding or the way things worked out? I thought back through all our conversations, from my mother's dismissive phone call from Cabo to my father's breakdown in the conference room. There had been expressions of regret about the situation, explanations about their desperation, and promises to make things right, but there hadn't been a clear, unqualified acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong, regardless of their circumstances or motivations. No, I said slowly. They've never actually apologized for taking the money. They've apologized for not communicating better, for causing me stress, for the way things escalated, but they've never said we were wrong to take your money without permission, and we're sorry we violated your trust. That tells you everything you need to know about whether they've actually learned anything from this experience, Zoe pointed out. If they can't acknowledge that the fundamental action was wrong, they're likely to do something similar again when they think they can get away with it. We talked for another hour about boundaries, family dynamics, and the challenge of maintaining relationships with people who don't respect your autonomy. Zoe shared stories from her own experience of setting boundaries with manipulative family members, and I found her perspective both validating and helpful for thinking about my own situation. The hardest part, she said as we prepared to leave, is accepting that you can't control whether other people choose to treat you with respect. All you can control is whether you continue to accept disrespectful treatment. It sounds like you've figured that part out. Walking home through the quiet streets of the Pearl District, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just a few weeks. The naive daughter who'd trusted her parents with her financial information was gone, replaced by someone who documented conversations, hired lawyers, and refused to be guilt-tripped into accepting bad treatment. The transformation felt necessary but also lonely, like growing up in a way that created distance from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next morning I met Marcus at his office to sign the settlement agreement and discuss the timeline for the final payment. The document was surprisingly simple for something that had required so much negotiation. My parents would pay the remaining $9,000 within 30 days, along with interest calculated at Oregon's legal rate. If they failed to meet the deadline, I could immediately pursue collection through the courts without needing to renegotiate. How confident are you that they'll make the final payment on time? Marcus asked as I signed the papers. Moderately confident, I replied. They clearly have access to the money, and they've seen that I'm willing to follow through on legal threats, but they might try to test whether I'll really take them to court over a missed deadline. If they miss the deadline by even one day, call me immediately, Marcus advised. People who've stolen from you once often assume they can manipulate their way out of consequences a second time. Don't give them that opportunity. I left his office feeling cautiously optimistic about the final resolution, but also prepared for the possibility that my parents might try one more manipulation or delay tactic. They'd surprised me with their complete capitulation to the settlement terms, but they'd also surprised me by stealing from me in the first place. I was learning not to make assumptions about their behavior based on my own standards of honesty and respect. The holiday season provided a welcome distraction from family drama. Nexus Creative was busy with year-end campaigns for our clients, and I threw myself into work with renewed energy. Having my emergency fund partially restored gave me a sense of financial security I hadn't realized I'd lost until it was threatened. I could focus on my job and my life without the constant underlying anxiety about money that had plagued me since discovering the theft. 3 days before Christmas, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. I was making dinner when the building's security buzzer rang, and the voice that came through the intercom was one I hadn't heard in months. Riley, it's Ethan. Can I come up? I have something for you. I hesitated, finger hovering over the door release button. My relationship with Ethan had been strained since our conversation about the lawsuit, and I wasn't sure I was ready for another family intervention disguised as a brotherly visit. But curiosity won out, and I buzzed him into the building. He appeared at my door 5 minutes later looking tired and carrying a wrapped gift and an envelope. Hey, he said awkwardly, thanks for letting me come up. I know things have been weird between us. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, thanks." He settled onto my couch while I retrieved a glass from the kitchen, and I noticed him taking in the details of my apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. Which, I realized, he probably was. Ethan had never visited my place before despite living less than an hour away. "Emma wanted me to give you this," he said, handing me the wrapped package. "It's a Christmas present for the baby's room. She thought you might want to pick out something yourself instead of having us choose for you." I unwrapped the gift to find a gift card to a high-end baby store, along with a handwritten note from Emma, expressing hope that we could maintain our relationship despite the recent family tension. The gesture was thoughtful and diplomatic, acknowledging the situation without taking sides or making judgments. "That's really sweet of her," I said, genuinely touched. "Tell her thank you, and that I'm looking forward to meeting my nephew." "She was hoping you might come to the hospital when he's born," Ethan said carefully. "I know things are complicated with Mom and Dad right now, but she doesn't want the baby to grow up not knowing his." The assumption that I was the one creating distance rather than responding to my parents' behavior rankled slightly, but I could see that Ethan was trying to build bridges rather than assign blame. "Of course I want to meet him. Emma and I don't have any problems with each other." Ethan nodded with visible relief. "Good. I was worried that all this legal stuff might affect your relationship with us too." "The legal stuff was between me and Mom and Dad," I clarified. "It didn't have anything to do with you or Emma, even though you got pulled into it." He was quiet for a moment, staring down at his hands. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "When Mom first told me about the money situation, I assumed there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I didn't really believe that they'd take $18,000 without asking you. And now I've seen the bank records Mom showed our lawyer. I've seen the dates and amounts, and I know about the vacation photos and the timeline of everything." He looked up at me with an expression of genuine regret. "What they did was wrong, Riley. Really wrong. And I was wrong to suggest that you should just accept it because they're family." The apology meant more to me than I'd expected. Ethan had always been the golden child, protected from the kind of treatment I'd experienced, and I'd never been sure whether he truly understood the dynamics that shaped our family interaction. Hearing him acknowledge the wrongness of our parents' behavior felt like validation from someone whose opinion mattered to me. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what actually happened." "I talked to Aunt Patty after the settlement was announced," Ethan continued. "She told me about some other things she'd noticed over the years. Patterns of behavior that I'd somehow missed or dismissed. I think I've been pretty blind to how differently Mom and Dad treat us." "It's not your fault that you didn't notice," I said, though part of me wondered if he'd chosen not to notice, because acknowledging the favoritism would have complicated his own relationship with our parents. "You were the beneficiary of the good treatment, not the victim of the bad treatment." "Maybe, but I should have paid better attention. I should have said something when I saw you being excluded from family decisions, or when your achievements got overlooked." He handed me the envelope he'd been holding. "This is from me, not from Mom and Dad. I wanted you to have it before the holidays." Inside the envelope was a check for $5,000, along with a note written in Ethan's careful handwriting, for the emergency fund they stole from. "Families should build each other up, not tear each other down. Love, Ethan." I stared at the check in shock, feeling tears spring to my eyes. "Ethan, I can't accept this. You have a baby coming and a mortgage, and your own expenses." "I can afford it," he said firmly. "Emma and I talked about it, and we both agreed that this was the right thing to do. We know it doesn't fix what Mom and Dad did, but we wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks your financial security is optional." The gift was so unexpected and thoughtful that I found myself crying in earnest, overwhelmed by the gesture and what it represented. For weeks I'd felt isolated from my family, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting basic honesty and respect. Having Ethan not only acknowledge the wrongness of our parents' behavior but also take concrete action to support me felt like a lifeline back to the possibility of healthy family relationships. "Thank you," I managed through my tears. "This means more than you know." We spent the next hour talking about family dynamics, childhood memories, and the challenge of maintaining relationships with people whose behavior you can't control. Ethan shared stories about times he'd noticed our parents treating me unfairly, but hadn't spoken up because he'd been young or confused or afraid of conflict. I told him about years of small slights and exclusions that had trained me to expect less consideration than he received. "I want to do better going forward," he said as he prepared to leave. "I want our kids to grow up knowing they have an aunt who's strong and independent, and who stands up for herself. That's a good example for them to have." After he left, I sat on my couch holding his check and Emma's gift card, feeling more hopeful about family relationships than I had in months. The money from Ethan wasn't about replacing what our parents had stolen. It was about demonstrating that love and support could coexist with respect for boundaries and autonomy. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Kath. Your father and I would like to invite you to Christmas dinner tomorrow. We understand if you're not ready, but we wanted you to know you're welcome." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decode the implications and motivations behind it. My parents had been completely silent since the settlement agreement was signed, and I'd assumed they were either too angry or too embarrassed to reach out. The invitation felt like an olive branch, but I wasn't sure whether it represented genuine desire for reconciliation or just another attempt to manipulate the situation. I called Aunt Patty to get her perspective on whether attending Christmas dinner would be wise or would just set me up for more emotional manipulation. "What does your gut tell you?" Patty asked after I'd explained the situation. "Do you think they've actually learned anything from this experience, or are they just trying to get back to normal without addressing what they did?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe they're genuinely sorry and want to rebuild our relation, but another part of me thinks they're just trying to sweep everything under the rug and pretend it never happened." "What would it take for you to feel comfortable having them in your life again?" Patty asked. "What would need to happen for you to trust them with your emotional and financial boundaries?" I thought about her question seriously, trying to separate my desire for family harmony from my need for genuine respect and safety. "They'd need to acknowledge that what they did was wrong, not just inconvenient or poorly communicated. They'd need to understand why I couldn't trust them with my financial information anymore, and they'd need to demonstrate that they see me as an equal adult whose autonomy deserves respect." "And do you think that's likely to happen at Christmas dinner?" "Probably not," I said with a sigh. "More likely, they'll act like everything is back to normal and expect me to go along with it because it's Christmas and we're family." "Then maybe Christmas dinner isn't the right setting for reconciliation," Patty suggested. "Maybe you need to have some honest conversations in private before you're ready for family gatherings." I texted my mother back, "Thank you for the invitation. I'm not ready for family dinner yet, but I hope we can talk soon about rebuilding our relationship in a healthy way." Her response came an hour later. "We're very disappointed. Families should be together on Christmas, regardless of disagreement." The message confirmed my suspicion that they viewed the theft and legal proceedings as a mere disagreement, rather than a fundamental violation of trust and boundaries. They weren't ready for the kind of honest conversation that would be necessary for genuine reconciliation. Christmas Day passed quietly and peacefully. I exchanged gifts with Zoe and her partner, took a long walk through the empty streets of downtown Portland, and video called Ethan and Emma to see their new holiday decorations and hear updates about the baby's progress. It was the first Christmas in years that I didn't spend managing family drama or absorbing criticism about my life choices. The day after Christmas, I received an email from David Walsh informing me that the final payment of $9,000 had been transferred to my account, along with the calculated interest. I checked my banking app and confirmed that the money was there. My stolen emergency fund, fully restored, plus compensation for the time and legal expenses required to get it back. Looking at my account balance, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the financial crisis was over, satisfaction that I'd stood up for myself and won, sadness that it had taken legal action to get my own family to treat me with basic respect, and uncertainty about what my relationship with my parents would look like going forward. I called Marcus to confirm that all settlement terms had been met, and to discuss whether any follow-up legal action was necessary. He congratulated me on the successful resolution and reminded me to keep copies of all documentation in case there were any future disputes. "You handled this situation exactly right," he said. "You set clear boundaries, followed through on consequences, and didn't let emotional manipulation override your legitimate interests. That's not always easy to do with family members. It didn't feel easy, I admit. There were a lot of moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh or if I should have been more understanding about their financial problems. Family members who steal from you are counting on that kind of self-doubt, Marcus replied. They're counting on your love and loyalty to override your self-preservation instincts. The fact that you were able to resist that manipulation and protect yourself shows real strength. After ending the call, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter to my parents. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter that I could revise and refine until it said exactly what I needed to communicate. The letter explained how their actions had affected me, what I would need to see from them to rebuild trust, and what our relationship might look like going forward if they were willing to respect my boundaries. I didn't send the letter immediately. Instead, I put it in a drawer and decided to wait a few weeks before deciding whether to mail it. The money had been repaid, the legal crisis was over, and I had time to think carefully about what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with my parents moving forward. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life and my own choices. My emergency fund was restored and secure, protected by hard-won knowledge about financial boundaries and legal rights. My family relationships were complicated and uncertain, but they were honest relationships based on my actual worth rather than my willingness to be accommodating at my own expense. The woman who'd discovered the theft in November had been naive about family loyalty and conflict avoidance. The woman who'd recovered her money in December understood the difference between love and manipulation, between family harmony and family health. It was a painful education, but one that would serve me well for the rest of my life. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on everything that had changed since that first phone call from the bank. I'd lost my illusions about my parents, but I'd gained clarity about my own worth and strength. I'd lost the comfortable fiction of family harmony, but I'd gained the reality of self-respect and financial security. It was a trade I could live with. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of First National Bank of Oregon, waiting for my appointment with a personal banker to discuss investment options for my emergency fund. The same fund that had been depleted by theft was now not only fully restored, but had grown substantially through careful budgeting and the unexpected gift from Ethan. I wore a navy blue dress that made me feel professional and confident, a far cry from the shaky, vulnerable woman who'd received that first devastating phone call about unauthorized withdrawal. The personal banker, a woman named Jennifer with kind eyes and a firm handshake, led me to her office and spread various investment prospectuses across her desk. As we discussed portfolio diversification and risk tolerance, I found myself thinking about how much my relationship with money had evolved. What had once been a simple emergency fund was now part of a comprehensive financial strategy designed to protect my independence and security. Based on what you've told me about your goals, I'd recommend keeping 3 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account for true emergencies, and investing the rest in a balanced portfolio, Jennifer explained. You're young enough to take some calculated risks for long-term growth. What kind of protections are in place to prevent unauthorized access? I asked the question that would have seemed paranoid a year ago but now felt essential. Jennifer nodded approvingly. We have multi-factor authentication, transaction alerts, and spending limits that can't be changed without in-person verification with photo ID. You'd be the only person with access to make investment decisions or withdraw. I scheduled a follow-up appointment to finalize the investment strategy and walked out of the bank, feeling optimistic about my financial future. The woman who'd once trusted her parents with her banking information was gone, replaced by someone who asked pointed questions about security protocols and insisted on maintaining complete control over her financial decisions. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe as I reached my car. Coffee later? I have exciting news about the promotion. Zoe had been interviewing for a creative director position at a competing agency, and I'd been anxiously waiting to hear about the outcome. Her friendship had been a lifeline during the worst months of the family crisis, and her success felt personal and important to me. We met at our usual coffee shop that afternoon, and Zoe's grin told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. I got it, she announced, practically bouncing in her chair. Creative director at Morrison & Associates, 20% salary increase, and my own team. That's amazing, I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for her achievement. When do you start? 2 weeks, which means we need to plan a proper celebration, and you need to tell me what's going on with your family situation. It's been months since you've mentioned your parents. The truth was that my relationship with my parents existed in a strange state of suspended animation. We'd exchanged a few polite text messages about holidays and family milestones, but we hadn't had any substantive conversations about rebuilding trust or addressing the underlying issues that had led to the theft. They seemed content to pretend that paying back the money had resolved everything, while I remained unwilling to return to the old dynamic of accepting whatever treatment they decided I deserved. We're in a holding pattern, I told Zoe. They act like everything is back to normal, and I maintain polite distance until they're ready to acknowledge that fundamental things need to change. Have you sent that letter you wrote? I'd told Zoe about the letter during one of our previous coffee dates, and she'd been encouraging me to either send it or let go of the relationship entirely. The limbo state I was maintaining felt sustainable in the short term but probably wasn't healthy for anyone involved in the long run. Not yet. I keep thinking I should wait until I'm sure what I want from them, but maybe that's just another form of avoiding conflict. I stirred my latte absently, watching the foam swirl around the edges of the cup. Part of me wants them to figure it out on their own, to reach out with a genuine apology and acknowledgement of what they did wrong. And the other part recognizes that waiting for them to change without any input from me is probably futile. They've shown me who they are, and unless I clearly communicate what I need to see differently, they'll assume the current situation is acceptable. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. What's the worst thing that could happen if you sent the letter? They could get angry and cut me off completely. They could accuse me of being vindictive and unforgiving. They could twist everything I say to make me look like the problem. The fears sounded smaller when I spoke them aloud than they did in my head. And what's the worst thing that could happen if you don't send? We stay in this weird pseudo-relationship where nobody addresses the elephant in the room, and I never find out whether genuine reconciliation is possible. I looked at Zoe across the small table, grateful for her ability to help me think through complicated emotional decisions. You think I should send it? I think you should do whatever feels most authentic to who you are now, not who you were before this happened. The woman who forced her parents to pay back $18,000 through legal action probably isn't the same woman who avoids difficult conversations to keep the peace. She was right, of course. The version of myself that had emerged from the crisis was more direct, more willing to set boundaries, and less concerned with managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being. Sending the letter would be consistent with those changes, even if the response wasn't what I hoped for. That evening I pulled the letter out of my desk drawer and read through it again. The words still felt true and necessary, a clear explanation of how their actions had affected me and what I would need to see to rebuild trust. I made a few minor revisions, printed a clean copy, and addressed an envelope before I could second-guess myself. The letter would reach them in 2 days. After that, the ball would be in their court to decide whether they wanted a real relationship with me or preferred to maintain the pretense that nothing significant had changed. 3 days later, my phone rang with a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail initially, needing a few minutes to prepare myself for whatever response the letter had provoked. When I finally listened to the message, his voice was subdued and thoughtful rather than angry or defensive. "Riley, it's Dad. We got your letter, and your mother and I would like to talk to you about it. Would you be willing to meet with us sometime this week? We could come to your place, or meet somewhere neutral, whatever you're comfortable with. We realize we owe you more than just paying back the money." The acknowledgement in that last sentence gave me hope that maybe they were finally ready for the kind of honest conversation that had been missing from all our previous interactions. I called him back and suggested meeting at a small restaurant in Southeast Portland, somewhere public but quiet enough for serious discussion. 2 days later, I arrived at the restaurant early and chose a corner booth where we'd have privacy but wouldn't feel trapped or overly intimate. My parents arrived exactly on time, looking nervous and somehow smaller than I remembered. The confident, controlling people who'd dismissed my concerns about the theft had been replaced by individuals who seemed genuinely uncertain about how to navigate this conversation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," my mother said as they settled into the booth across from me. Her voice lacked the edge of irritation that had characterized most of our recent interactions. Your letter was very clear about how we hurt you, and we wanted a chance to respond properly. We've been doing a lot of thinking since the legal situation was resolved, my father added. We talked to a counselor about family dynamics and communication, and we're starting to understand how our behavior affected you over the years. The mention of counseling surprised me. My parents had always been skeptical of therapy, viewing it as self-indulgent navel-gazing rather than practical problem-solving. The fact that they'd sought professional guidance suggested they were taking the situation more seriously than I'd expected. What did you learn? I asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. We learned that we've been treating your financial autonomy as optional in a way we never would with Ethan, my mother said quietly. We learned that loving someone doesn't give you the right to make decisions for them or take things from them without permission. And we learned that the way we raised you to be accommodating and flexible trained you to accept treatment that wasn't fair or respectful. The acknowledgement was more comprehensive than anything I'd heard from them before, addressing not just the specific theft, but the broader pattern of behavior that had made it possible. My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. We wrote you a letter too, he said, sliding it across the table. A real apology, not just an explanation or an expression of regret. We wanted to get the words right. I opened the letter and read through it carefully. It was brief but substantive, acknowledging that what they'd done was theft regardless of their motivations, apologizing for violating my trust and financial boundaries, and expressing understanding about why I'd needed to take legal action to protect myself. Most importantly, it didn't include any justifications or requests for me to be more understanding about their circumstances. This means a lot, I said, feeling tears spring to my eyes. This is what I needed to hear from you. We know we can't undo what we did, my mother continued, but we want to figure out how to rebuild a relationship with you that's based on respect and honesty, instead of us just expecting you to go along with whatever we decide. We spent the next 2 hours talking about family dynamics, boundary setting, and what our relationship might look like going forward. They asked thoughtful questions about my financial goals and career aspirations, showing interest in my life that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. They acknowledged specific instances where they'd excluded me from family decisions or dismissed my concerns, demonstrating that their self-reflection had been thorough rather than superficial. We'd like to start having regular family dinners again, my father said as our conversation wound down. But we want you to feel comfortable setting whatever boundaries you need. If you don't want to discuss certain topics, or if you need to leave early, or if you just need time before you're ready for family gatherings, we understand. The offer felt reasonable and respectful, acknowledging that trust would need to be rebuilt gradually, rather than expecting immediate forgiveness and return to previous patterns. I agreed to try monthly dinners with the understanding that the frequency and format could be adjusted based on how everyone felt about the interactions. Walking to my car after the restaurant meeting, I felt lighter than I had in months. The conversation hadn't erased the hurt and betrayal I'd experienced, but it had opened the door to the possibility of genuine reconciliation based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. 6 weeks later, I attended my nephew's first birthday party at Ethan and Emma's house. The extended family was there, including my parents, Aunt Patty, and several cousins I hadn't seen since the crisis began. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, focused on celebrating the baby rather than navigating family tension. My parents and I interacted naturally but without the forced intimacy that had characterized our relationship before. They asked about my work and my investment planning, showing genuine interest in my financial independence, rather than viewing it as resources potentially available for family use. When my nephew took his first steps during the party, moving unsteadily between his parents and grandparents, I felt genuinely happy to be witnessing the milestone. He looks like you did at that age, my mother said, settling beside me on Ethan's couch as we watched the toddler explore his new mobility, determined and fearless, ready to figure things out on his own. Those are good qualities, I replied, and I meant the determination and fearlessness that had once frustrated my parents when I was growing up were the same qualities that had enabled me to stand up for myself when they violated my boundaries. As the party wound down and I prepared to leave, my father approached me with a small wrapped gift. "This isn't a birthday present," he said with a slightly embarrassed smile. "It's something we wanted you to have." Inside the wrapping was a framed photo of our whole family from my college graduation, a picture I'd never seen before. In it, I was standing between my parents wearing my cap and gown, all of us smiling genuinely at the camera. It was the kind of family photo I'd always wanted to be included in, memorializing an achievement that had been mine alone. "We found this in your mother's old photo albums," my father explained. "We realized we never gave you a copy, and we thought you might like to have it now." The gesture was small but meaningful, a tangible acknowledgement of my accomplishments and my place in the family. I thanked them and carefully placed the frame in my purse, planning to display it in my apartment where it would remind me of both my achievements and the possibility of healthy family relationships. Driving home through Portland's evening traffic, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating phone call from the bank almost a year ago. The crisis that had nearly destroyed my relationship with my parents had ultimately led to a more honest and respectful dynamic between us. The woman who'd once accepted whatever treatment she received had been replaced by someone who insisted on being valued and respected. My emergency fund was secure and growing, my career was thriving with new responsibilities and recognition. My family relationships were complicated but genuine, based on mutual respect rather than obligation and accommodation. The painful education in boundaries and self-advocacy had been expensive in every sense, but it had been worth the cost. Some lessons can only be learned through crisis, and some growth only happens when comfortable patterns are shattered beyond repair. I wouldn't choose to repeat the experience of having my own parents steal from me, but I also wouldn't trade the strength and clarity that had emerged from surviving it. The woman driving home that night was someone I was proud to be: financially independent, emotionally resilient, and unwilling to accept less than she deserved from anyone, including family. It had taken a crisis to discover who I could become. When I finally decided to stop accommodating my way through life, it was the best investment I'd ever made. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.